crystal chandeliers, string quartet, champagne flutes catching light. Wealth whispers here. Hang-jun, 34. Immaculate black suit, cold authority, stands beside his fiancée Min-soo Park, 28. Her hand rests on his arm, the 4-carat diamond on her finger, a declaration of alliance, not love. Min-soo, the caterer needs final numbers by Wednesday, and your mother wants to discuss the ceremony order. Hang-jun nods distantly, his dark eyes scanning the room with automatic surveillance. A man who has made too many enemies to ever relax. Then, he sees a woman across the ballroom, camera around her neck, baby carrier strapped to her chest. Hang-jun's champagne glass stops halfway to his lips. Diana Bassett, 31, 3 years older, 3 years gone, still devastating. She adjusts her camera lens, professional, focused. The baby in the carrier stirs. Pale skin, soft brown curls, maybe 2 years old. The timeline slams into him. Diana looks up. Their eyes meet across the crowded room. She doesn't gasp, doesn't run, doesn't freeze. She holds his gaze for 3 steady heartbeats and turns back to her camera settings, like he's nobody. Hang-jun stands paralyzed as Diana moves through the crowd, photographing guests, the baby sleeping against her chest. One child. White. The math is there. Brutal, impossible, agonizing. Min-soo, noticing. Hang-jun? Is something wrong? Everything. The woman he destroyed 3 years ago. With a child he can't claim just by looking. His child? Or proof she moved on? Hang-jun pulls out his phone, fingers already typing. Hang-jun, I need to leave. Min-soo, frowning. We haven't even… Hang-jun, I'll call you. It's a dismissal. She knows it. He walks toward where Diana was standing, but she's already gone, slipped out through the service entrance like smoke. As he stands alone in the glittering ballroom, the orchestra plays on. His carefully constructed life, the engagement, the alliance, the lie, just shattered against 3 seconds of eye contact. And the woman who walked away from him 3 years ago? She just walked away again, carrying either his daughter or his worst fear. He won't rest until he knows which. The chandelier light fractured across crystal and champagne, and Hang-jun was nodding at something his fiancée was saying, orchids versus peonies, perhaps, or the merits of spring versus summer, when the world contracted to a single point across the ballroom. Diana. She moved along the periphery with the fluid invisibility of hired help. Black camera obscuring half her face as she documented other people's happiness. Professional, detached. The crowd shifted, and he saw it. The baby carrier strapped to her chest, a small bundle of cotton and tiny fists tucked against her heart. Jun, are you listening? Minji's voice arrived from somewhere very far away. He wasn't. He couldn't. Diana lowered her camera to check the display, and her face emerged fully into the light. Thinner than he remembered, shadows beneath her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, but still her. Still the woman whose absence had hollowed him out for 18 months. She looked up. Their eyes met. He waited for something. A gasp, a stumble, anger flashing across her features like summer lightning. Instead, Diana held his gaze with devastating steadiness. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then she simply turned back to her camera, adjusting the lens with the same careful precision she'd once used to touch his face. That calm was a knife between his ribs. "Excuse me," he heard himself say. Minji was still talking, her hand light on his sleeve, but he was already moving. Threading through clusters of guests, past the elaborate ice sculpture melting slowly in its own perfection, following the dark current of Diana's retreat. The baby. God, the baby. Its face had been turned away, tucked into sleep or privacy. Pale skin, soft curls catching the light. Nothing definitive. Nothing that answered the question roaring through his mind. He'd done the math 1,000 times in the months after she'd disappeared. The timeline was possible. The timeline was probable. The timeline was destroying him. He reached the service corridor just in time to see a door closing at the far end. The sudden absence of music and chatter felt like going underwater. His footsteps echoed against sterile walls as he broke into a run, past stacked chairs and rolling carts of dishes, through a maze of utilitarian hallways that all looked the same. Diana! His voice cracked on her name. The corridor branched. He chose left, then right, his breath coming harder now, ties suddenly too tight. Another corner. Another empty hallway. The hotel had swallowed her whole. Or perhaps she'd always been this good at vanishing. He'd just never been on the receiving end before. He stopped, hands braced against his knees, lungs burning. Somewhere above him, the party continued. Minji would be looking for him, her patient smile beginning to fray. The wedding planner would be circling, tablet in hand, ready to confirm the final head count. His mother would want to introduce him to someone important, someone whose approval mattered. His carefully constructed life was waiting upstairs, all its pieces arranged just so. But here, in the fluorescent silence of the service corridors, Hang-jun closed his eyes and saw only Diana's face in those 3 heartbeats, the face of someone who had learned to look at him and feel nothing at all. Or perhaps, even worse, someone who had learned to feel everything and show none of it. The baby's small fist had been curled against her collarbone. He'd seen that much. He'd seen everything and nothing at all. Minho's report arrived before dawn, a digital file that landed in Hang-jun's inbox with the soft ping of inevitability. He opened it in his home office while Minji slept upstairs, the engagement ring he'd placed on her finger 3 months ago, catching streetlight from the window. Diana Bassett, 29. Owner of Diana Bassett Photography, LLC. A business designation that sounded more impressive than the reality Minho's financial records revealed. She was drowning. 3 months behind on her apartment lease, credit cards maxed out, existing on the threadbare edge of survival that came from trying to build something beautiful in a city that devoured dreams. Echo Park. A 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. Monthly rent that should have been manageable, but clearly wasn't. Not when freelance photography meant feast or famine, and famine had apparently taken up permanent residence. He scrolled past bank statements that made his chest tighten, past invoice after unpaid invoice, until he reached the section that mattered. Freya Bassett, born February 14th, Valentine's Day baby, 2 years old, no father listed on the birth certificate. Hang-jun stared at the date until the numbers blurred. February meant conception in May. May meant the last month they'd been together, before his father's ultimatum, before he'd made the choice that had seemed so clear at the time. Family duty, company legacy, the right thing. He'd told himself it was the right thing, but Minho's report contained one detail that cut deeper than all the financial struggle, all the evidence of Diana raising a child alone. In the 3 years since their relationship ended, Diana Bassett had not been on a single date. No dating apps. She no social media posts suggesting romantic interest. No one, just her and Freya, alone against the world. The evidence pointed to a conclusion his heart seized on desperately, but that pale skin, those soft curls that could belong to anyone, created a chasm of doubt he couldn't bridge. He needed to know. The not knowing was acid in his veins, which was why, at 2 in the morning, he sat in his car across from her apartment building, engine off, watching a 4th-floor window where a single light still burned. She was awake. Was the baby sick? Did Freya wake her with nightmares? Or was Diana staring at bills she couldn't pay, making impossible calculations about which necessity to sacrifice first? His phone buzzed. Minji. Where are you? It's late. He typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive. Be home soon. The lie tasted like all the others he'd told recently. Since the gala, he'd been unraveling, the careful architecture of his choices revealing itself as the house of cards it had always been. The light in Diana's window went dark. Hang-jun imagined her climbing into bed, maybe with Freya tucked beside her in the small space, both of them wrapped in blankets against the chill. He imagined soft breathing and smaller breaths, a whole life he might have been part of if he'd chosen differently. If Freya was his, and God, everything except that pale skin said she was, then Diana had been pregnant when he'd walked away. She'd carried his child, given birth alone, raised their daughter through 2 years of struggle, while he'd built his perfect life with someone else. The engagement ring on his own finger felt like a shackle. He should leave, go home, marry Minji and stop excavating a past he'd buried for good reason. But his hands stayed on the steering wheel, and his eyes stayed on that darkened window, and the paralysis of hope and fear kept him frozen there until the sky began to pale with morning. The park was dappled with afternoon light, and Hang-jun watched from behind sunglasses he didn't need, pretending to read a newspaper like some character from a noir film. Diana moved through the portrait session with easy competence, coaxing smiles from reluctant children, adjusting angles with the same graceful efficiency he remembered from when she'd photographed him. That first shoot. God, he could still see it. The way she'd walked into the restaurant his PR team had chosen. All business with her camera bag and light meter, then stopped mid-step when she saw him. Recognition flickering across her face, not of who he was, but of what he was. "You're not a reformed anything," she'd said, skipping past pleasantries. "You're just better at hiding it now." He should have ended the interview right there. Instead, he'd laughed, genuinely laughed for the first time in months, and said, "Then I suppose you'll have to decide what story you want to tell." She'd told the truth somehow, without telling it at all. Her photographs had captured something the sanitized press releases never could. A man caught between worlds, dangerous and yearning in equal measure. The story ran. His father approved. And Hang-jun had shown up at her studio 3 days later with coffee, and no excuse except honesty. I want to see you again." Diana had looked at him for a long moment. "This is a terrible idea." "I know. You're going to break my heart." "Probably," he'd admitted, because even then he'd known how it would end. Men like him didn't get happy endings with women like her. But she'd taken the coffee anyway. 6 months of fire. That's what they'd had. Passion that burned away pretense. Nights when she'd challenge his rationalizations and he'd defend empires built on sand, both of them knowing the argument was foreplay. She'd made him laugh at himself, made him want impossible things, made him think maybe, just maybe, he could be the man she saw when she looked at him without flinching. Then the photograph arrived. Diana leaving his apartment at dawn, crosshairs drawn over her face in red ink. No note needed. He destroyed her to save her. She used every cruel word he could find, every weapon his upbringing had sharpened. A curiosity, nothing more. I was slumming. He'd watched her face crumble, watched her rebuild it into something cold and final, and when she walked away, he told himself it was mercy. He'd never asked if she was pregnant. The thought hadn't even occurred to him. Now, in the park, Freya sat on a blanket surrounded by toys she mostly ignored in favor of pulling grass and examining it with scientific intensity. 2 years old. Small for her age, maybe. Or perhaps he just didn't know what 2-year-olds looked like. Those pale curls caught the light like spun gold. Diana finished with the family, accepting payment via phone app, with the tired smile of someone who needed every dollar. She packed her equipment with practiced efficiency, then scooped Freya onto her hip, the baby's small hand immediately tangling in her mother's dark hair. She turned, walked directly toward him. Hang-jun's heart stopped. Had she seen him? Known he was there? But no. Diana's gaze was fixed on something past his shoulder, her expression neutral, exhausted. She was just leaving, and his bench happened to be on the path to the parking lot, 20 feet away, 15. He could see Freya's face clearly now, round cheeks and serious dark eyes that swept past him without recognition, because why would they? He was a stranger with a newspaper. 10 feet. Diana's phone rang. She shifted Freya to answer it, and their trajectory changed, veering left toward the playground instead. He exhaled shakily. The newspaper crumpled in his grip. The phone call was brief. Diana ended it, slipped the phone into her pocket, and turned the stroller in a slow, deliberate arc until she was facing him directly. "You're not subtle," she said, her voice carrying the 20 feet between them with perfect clarity. "Are you going to keep following me, or are we going to have this conversation?" His newspaper crumpled further. No point in pretending now. Hang-jun stood, legs uncertain beneath him, and crossed the distance that felt both infinite and insufficient. Up close, the changes were more pronounced. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. A thinness to her face that spoke of too many meals skipped, too many nights short on sleep. But her gaze was steady, unflinching. The same direct stare that had seen through him from the beginning. "The bench," she said, nodding toward the one he'd just abandoned. They sat. Freya slept in the stroller between them, a small buffer of innocence and consequence. The afternoon light filtered through leaves overhead, dappling across the baby's face, and Hang-jun couldn't stop staring, trying to find himself in those features, trying to see past the pale skin to whatever truth lay beneath. "Is she mine?" The question came out raw, stripped of all the eloquent phrasing he'd rehearsed during sleepless nights. Diana didn't flinch. She'd cried all her tears over him, he realized. There was nothing left now except this terrible, calm acceptance. "Yes." One word. It detonated in his chest. "But He gestured helplessly at Freya's sleeping form. "She's so pale?" Diana's laugh was knife-edged. "Your grandmother. Your father mentioned her once, remember? When you were telling me about your family history. Back when you still pretended I might be part of it. She was from your mother's side. Russian ancestry, recessive genes that skipped generations. Freya got them." She paused. "I did a DNA test anyway. For myself, not for you. I needed to be sure. But I was sure." The park spun around him. His grandmother. God, yes. He remembered the photographs his mother kept. A woman with porcelain skin and light hair, who'd died before he was born. Genetics he'd never thought about, never imagined would matter. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words scraped his throat. "Why didn't you tell you?" Diana turned to face him fully, and the devastation in her eyes was worse than anger. "When, exactly? Before or after you called me a curiosity? Before or after you said you were slumming?" Each word was a stone. He'd earned everyone. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "No, you didn't bother to know." She adjusted the stroller's canopy with hands that trembled slightly, the only crack in her composure. "I found out 2 weeks after you destroyed us. I stood in my bathroom with a positive test and thought about calling you, for about 30 seconds. Then I remembered the look on your face when you said those things, and I realized you'd already made your choice. I was trying to protect you." "I know." Her voice went soft, which somehow hurt more. "Minho wasn't as subtle as he thought 3 years ago. I pieced it together eventually. The photograph, the threats. You pushed me away to keep me safe." She looked at Freya, something fierce and protective transforming her features. "But you don't get to claim her now. You don't get to ride in and play savior or father or whatever role you've decided fits your narrative. You made your choice, Hang-jun. You chose your world over ours. Live with it." The threats were real. His voice came out harder than he intended. "Not implied, not vague. They sent me photographs of you, at the coffee shop you went to every Tuesday, outside your studio, getting into your car. They knew your routine. They knew where you were vulnerable." He swallowed against the memory. "The last one had a price on it. 50,000 for proof of death." Diana went very still. "My enemies wanted to send a message, and you were the perfect target. The woman who'd gotten close to me, who saw past the sanitized version." He leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. "Xia, I had 3 options. Increase your security so overtly, you'd ask questions I couldn't answer. Bring you fully into my world and make you a permanent target. or make you hate me enough to walk away and never look back. So you chose the cruelest option. Her voice was flat. I chose the safest option for you. The slap of her hand against his face rang out across the park. Freya stirred in her stroller, but didn't wake. You played God with my life. Diana's calm shattered like glass, fury pouring through the cracks. You decided what I could handle, what risks I could take, what truths I deserved to know. Did you ask me? Did you give me a choice? She stood, the motion violent despite its quietness. I was an adult, Hang-jun, a grown woman who'd survived 26 years on this planet without your protection. But you looked at me and saw what? A damsel? A liability? Something fragile that needed to be managed? You don't understand the kind of people. No, you don't understand. Her voice cracked. I was carrying your child, pregnant and alone, working double shifts to save up for medical bills, throwing up between photo shoots, crying myself to sleep every night, believing I'd been stupid enough to love someone who thought I was trash. The tremor in her hands was visible now, spreading to her shoulders. I could have handled threats. I could have handled danger. What I couldn't handle was believing the man I loved had looked at me with contempt. He reached for her. She stepped back. 3 years, Hang-jun. 3 years of struggling, of Freya asking why she doesn't have a daddy like the other kids at playgroup. 3 years of making impossible choices about which bill to pay, whether I could afford her medicine, whether I should give up my business and get a steady job that would mean less time with my daughter, but maybe, finally, enough money for both rent and food. The exhaustion in her shoulders was profound. She looked like she might collapse under the weight of everything she'd been carrying alone. I was protecting you, he said desperately. No. Diana's voice went quiet again, but this quietness was worse than the rage. You were protecting yourself from having to fight for me, because fighting would have meant risk. It would have meant standing up to your father, your organization, your whole carefully constructed world. It was easier to break my heart than to choose me. She gripped the stroller handles, knuckles white. You didn't save me from your enemies, Hang-jun. You saved yourself from having to decide if I was worth the war. She looked at him one last time, and he saw himself reflected in her eyes. Not the monster he'd played, but something worse. A coward dressed in noble intentions. Stay away from us. That's the one choice you don't get to unmake. She walked away, and this time he let her go, because what defense could he possibly offer against the truth? She made it 10 steps before stopping. Her shoulders rose and fell with a breath that looked like it hurt. Someone's been following me, Diana said, without turning around. The world tilted sideways. Hang-jun was on his feet before conscious thought. What? For the past 2 weeks, maybe longer. She turned slowly, and the fear beneath her anger was finely visible. Phone calls where nobody speaks, just breathing, then hanging up. I thought it was spam at first, but they know my schedule. They call right after I drop Freya at daycare, right after I finish shoots. His heart was a drum against his ribs. What else? Someone broke into my apartment last week, Wednesday, while I was working. Nothing stolen. That's what the police said anyway. Petty theft gone wrong. Her laugh was brittle. But I know my space. I know where everything goes. And Freya's photographs on the fridge. Someone moved them, just slightly. Enough that I noticed. Diana, I told myself I was paranoid, that I was stressed and seeing patterns that weren't there. She gripped the stroller tighter. Then yesterday, my studio. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Minho answered on the first ring. I need everything on Diana's studio, now. Already sent it. Minho's voice was grim. Got the police report 20 minutes ago. I was about to call you. Hang-jun pulled up the file on his phone with hands that wanted to shake. When crime scene photographs loaded, expensive camera equipment smashed beyond repair, lights shattered, backdrops shredded, thousands of dollars in damage. But it was the wall that made his vision narrow to a pinpoint. Spray paint, red as arterial blood. Shame about your family. They know, Minho said quietly. About the kid. About her being yours. The timeline matches. 2 weeks ago, chatter picked up in the organization. Someone asking questions about your old relationships. I flagged it, but thought it was just gossip. Find out who. Hang-jun's voice didn't sound like his own. Find out who's doing this and shut it down. Already working on it. But sir, if they're making moves this overt, they weren't asking for permission anymore. They were announcing intentions. Diana watched him with eyes that had seen too much. What does it say? The graffiti. He couldn't make himself tell her. Couldn't force the words through his throat. She walked over and took his phone from his nerveless fingers. Read the screen. The color drained from her face, but her voice stayed steady. How long have you known? I just confirmed it. He wanted to touch her, to offer comfort, but had lost that right 3 years ago. Diana, I need to put protection on you. Full security detail, safe house, everything. You need to? She handed back his phone. This is because of you. They're targeting us because of you, because I had the misfortune of loving you 3 years ago. Every word was true. Every word flayed him. I thought I was protecting you, he said, the justification ashes in his mouth. I thought if I pushed you away, if you hated me, they'd lose interest. You'd be irrelevant. But they didn't lose interest. Diana's voice was hollow. They just waited. And when I was alone, unprotected, raising your daughter without your name, or your resources, or your security, they circled back. You didn't protect me, Hang-jun. You just made me an easier target. The truth of it crushed him. By loving her, he'd marked her. By leaving her, he'd stripped away any shield his name might have provided. His protection had accomplished nothing except leaving Diana and Freya vulnerable to the exact danger he'd tried to prevent. Let me fix this, he begged. Freya stirred in her stroller, small face scrunching with the beginning of wakefulness. Diana looked at her daughter, then at him, and he saw the moment she made the calculation. Pride versus survival. Rage versus a 2-year-old's safety. I hate you, she said clearly. But tell me what we need to do. The sound of splintering wood jerked Diana awake at 1:47 a.m. She grabbed Freya from the crib before her brain fully processed what was happening. Someone was in her apartment. Freya whimpered against her shoulder. Diana's hand found her phone as she backed into the bathroom, the only room with a lock that might hold. She shoved a towel under the door, turned on the exhaust fan to muffle Freya's crying, and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. Someone's in my apartment. 4th floor, 2847 Sunset Boulevard, Unit 4C. I have a baby. Footsteps in her bedroom. Slow. Deliberate. Not even trying to be quiet. The 911 operator's voice was distant static. Diana heard drawers opening, things being moved. Then silence. Terrible, waiting silence. She should call someone. Her mother was 3 states away. Her friends were civilians who couldn't help. There was only one person with the resources to... She hated herself as she scrolled to his number. Hated him more as it rang. Hang-jun answered before the first ring finished. Diana? They're in my apartment, she whispered. Right now. I'm in the bathroom with Freya, and I don't... I'm coming. 10 minutes. Stay on the line. It was 8 minutes. She heard the sirens, heard police entering her apartment, heard them clear each room with professional efficiency. When they knocked on the bathroom door, she still waited for Hang-jun's voice before opening it. He stood in her destroyed living room, Minho and 2 other security personnel flanking him. His eyes found hers, tracked to Freya clutched against her chest, and something in his expression cracked. The police detective was explaining about forced entry, about checking for stolen items, when Diana saw it. Her bedroom mirror, visible through the doorway. Red lipstick, her lipstick, scrawled across the glass. Beautiful family. Shame if something happened. She felt Hang-jun's hand on her back, steadying her before she swayed. Her landlord arrived 20 minutes later, bathrobe over pajamas, face pinched with aggravation. Ms. Bassett, this is the final incident. Break-in, police, now vandalism. I have other tenants to consider. You have 30 days to vacate. She was the victim. Hang-jun started. I don't care who's the victim. I care that my building isn't a crime scene. The landlord's gaze raked over Diana with thinly veiled contempt. 30 days, non-negotiable. They ended up at the police station for statements. Diana sat with Freya sleeping fitfully in her arms, giving details to a detective who looked like he'd seen it all before and expected to see it again. She didn't hear him arrive, just felt the temperature in the room drop. Hang-jun's father stood in the doorway, 60 years of authority wrapped in a cashmere coat. His gaze swept the scene, the police station, Diana in her hastily thrown-on clothes, Freya's small form, and his lip curled. This is what happens when you forget your place, he said, the words directed at Hang-jun, but meant to cut Diana. When you play with things that don't belong in your world. Diana felt herself shrinking, felt the weight of his disdain like a physical force. She'd never met him before, but she recognized the species, men who measured worth in bloodlines and bank accounts. Hang-jun moved. One moment he was across the room, the next he stood between his father and Diana, a wall of contained fury. She's not the one who forgot her place, he said, voice low and deadly. I did, and I'm done. His father's eyes narrowed. Careful, boy. Freya is my daughter. The words rang out clear enough for everyone in the station to hear. And I'm breaking my engagement, tonight, right now. He turned slightly, and Diana saw his profile, jaw set, eyes blazing. You taught me that family comes first. You were right. This is my family, Diana and Freya. Everything else is negotiable. The silence stretched like wire pulled taut. His father smiled, cold as winter. Then you're no son of mine. I can live with that, Hang-jun said. Can you? The police station felt too bright, too loud, too full of strangers processing tragedy like paperwork. Diana sat in a plastic chair that dug into her spine, and Freya wouldn't stop crying. Not the normal fussy cry of a tired toddler, but the jagged, gasping sobs of a child who'd absorbed her mother's terror through osmosis. Diana rocked her, whispered soothing nonsense, tried every trick that usually worked. Nothing helped. Freya's small body was rigid with distress, her face blotchy and wet. Shh, baby, it's okay. We're safe now. Mama's here. But Diana's voice shook, and 2-year-olds were better lie detectors than any machine. Freya knew they weren't okay, knew their home had been violated, knew her mother was barely holding together. Diana felt herself fracturing. The break-in, the eviction, Hang-jun's father's contempt, the message on her mirror. It was too much. Her hands trembled as she held her daughter, and she couldn't stop them, couldn't be the steady anchor Freya needed, because she was drowning too. May I? Hang-jun's voice was quiet, careful. He stood a few feet away, hands at his sides, waiting for permission he knew he hadn't earned. Diana looked up at him through exhausted, burning eyes. Every instinct screamed to refuse. He'd forfeited this right. He didn't get to swoop in now, didn't get to play hero or father, or whatever role salved his guilt. But Freya was sobbing, and Diana had nothing left to give. She nodded, too tired to speak. Hang-jun moved slowly, like approaching a wild thing. He lifted Freya from Diana's arms with the awkward gentleness of someone who'd never held a child before. For a moment, Diana tensed, ready to take her back. Then Freya went quiet. Not gradually. Instantly, her sobs cut off mid-breath as she found herself in unfamiliar arms. She blinked, tears still wet on her cheeks, and studied Hang-jun's face with solemn, unnerving focus. He stood frozen, this man who commanded rooms and negotiated fortunes, utterly undone by 26 pounds of toddler. Freya reached out one small hand, still sticky with tears, and touched his cheek. Patted it gently, as if testing whether he was real. Hi. Freya said softly. The word was barely a whisper, but Diana watched it hit Hang-jun like a bullet. His eyes went bright and liquid. His throat worked. He couldn't seem to form words, could only stare at his daughter, their daughter, as she explored his face with innocent curiosity. "Hi!" he finally managed, voice wrecked. "Hi, Freya." She smiled. Just a little, tentative thing. Then she laid her head on his shoulder and stuck her thumb in her mouth, body finally relaxing into the exhaustion she'd been fighting. Diana watched the transformation ripple through him. The calculating strategist, the controlled negotiator, the man who made impossible choices. All of it fell away. What remained was raw and unguarded. A father meeting his daughter, a man realizing what he'd lost, what he'd almost never had. "She has your eyes," Diana heard herself whisper. Hang-jun looked at her then. Freya's small weight settled against his chest and shook his head slowly. "No," he said, and his voice carried something like wonder. "She has yours. I just never noticed how beautiful they were." The words shouldn't have meant anything. After everything, the cruelty, the abandonment, the 3 years of silence, they shouldn't have been able to touch her. But Diana felt something crack in her chest anyway. Some barrier she'd built so carefully, brick by bitter brick. Because he wasn't looking at her with strategy or guilt or even desire. He was looking at her the way Freya did, with simple, devastating recognition. Seeing her, really seeing her, maybe for the first time, reflected in the child they'd made. She couldn't keep them apart. Even if she wanted to, even if rage and self-preservation demanded it. Freya deserved a father, and Hang-jun, despite everything, despite the ruin he'd caused, was hers. "Don't break her heart," Diana said quietly. "Mine's already gone, but hers. Never," he promised. And Diana chose to believe him. The guest cottage was bigger than her apartment had been. Diana noticed this immediately, and hated that she noticed. Hated the way wealth could make everything seem smaller in retrospect, even her struggles. "Your space," Hang-jun said, setting down the last box. Everything she and Freya owned fit in her 10-year-old sedan. Clothes, toys, kitchen essentials, her backup camera equipment. A life compressed into containers that barely filled the cottage's living room. "You can arrange it however you want. Change anything. I'll have someone bring—" "No." Diana's voice was firm. "I don't need your charity. This is protection and co-parenting, nothing more." He nodded, jaw tight. "Understood." "I'm serious, Hang-jun. This doesn't mean reconciliation or romance or forgiveness. You don't get to swoop in and fix everything with money and security guards." She gestured at the pristine cottage, the kind of place she'd have photographed for architectural magazines in another life. "We're not together. We're not a family. We're two people raising a child in proximity because the alternative is risking her safety." "I know." His hands were in his pockets, careful not to touch anything, respecting the boundaries she was drawing like lines in sand. "Whatever you need. However you want this to work." She softened slightly. "You can help me unpack." They worked in silence, Diana directing where things should go, Hang-jun following instructions without comment. He didn't remark on her threadbare towels or the toys held together with tape, didn't offer to replace anything, just helped her build a home from what she had. That evening, Freya refused to sleep unless someone read her favorite book, a battered copy of Goodnight Moon with a cover held on by packing tape. Diana started to reach for it, but Hang-jun was faster. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. Diana watched from the doorway as he settled into the cottage's armchair, Freya curled against his chest. His voice was uncertain at first, stumbling over the familiar rhythm. But Freya didn't care about his inexperience. She just tucked her head under his chin and listened, small hand fisting in his shirt. "Good night, room. Good night, moon. Good night, cow, jumping over the moon." By the time he reached goodnight noises everywhere, Freya was asleep, thumb in her mouth, completely trusting. Hang-jun looked up, met Diana's eyes across the dim room. "I know you don't trust me," he said softly. careful not to wake their daughter. I know I don't deserve this, any of this. The chance to know her, to be in your life, even at the periphery. His hand settled protectively over Freya's tiny body. But I promise, Diana, I'll earn it. However long it takes. Whatever it takes. I won't hurt either of you again. Diana wanted to say something cutting, something to remind him that promises meant nothing against 3 years of absence. But the words wouldn't come. She just stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep on her father's chest, and felt something shift inside her. Small, barely noticeable, like the first crack in winter ice. She didn't respond, just turned away, giving them privacy she hadn't planned to offer. Later that night, unable to sleep in the too comfortable bed, Diana retrieved her camera. She found them still on the couch, both asleep now. Hang-jun's head tipped back, one large hand spanning Freya's back, protective even in unconsciousness. Freya drooled slightly on his expensive shirt, utterly at peace. Diana raised her camera, framed the shot, clicked. She titled it "The Moment Everything Changed" and saved it to her hard drive, buried in a folder she told herself she'd probably delete later. But she knew she wouldn't. She wasn't ready to forgive him, wasn't ready to trust that this version of Hang-jun, gentle, devoted, present, would last beyond the immediate crisis. 3 years of survival had taught her that hope was dangerous, that letting your guard down led to devastation. But for the first time since she'd walked away from him, brokenhearted, Diana allowed herself the smallest, most carefully guarded possibility. Maybe, someday, if he proved himself, if he stayed, if he chose them over and over again, she could